Continuation of Pollyanna, Chapter 19, which is somewhat surprising. Pollyanna entered school in September. Preliminary examinations showed that she was well advanced for a girl of her years, and she was soon a happy member of a class of girls and boys her own age. School in some ways was a surprise to Pollyanna, and Pollyanna certainly in many ways was very much a surprise to the school. They were soon on the best of terms, however, and to her aunt Pollyanna confessed that going to school was living after all, though she had had her doubts before. In spite of her delight in her new work, Pollyanna did not forget her old friends. True, she could not give them quite so much time now, of course, but she gave them what time she could. Perhaps John Pendleton, of them all, however, was the most dissatisfied. On Saturday afternoon he spoke to her about it. "See here, Pollyanna, how would you like to come and live with me?" he asked, a little impatiently. "I don't see anything of you nowadays." Pollyanna laughed. Mr. Pendleton was such a funny man. "I thought you didn't like to have folks round," she said. He made a wry face. "Oh, but that was before you taught me to play that wonderful game of yours. Now I'm glad to be waited on, hand and foot. Never mind. I'll be on my own 2 feet yet, one of these days. Then I'll see who steps around," he finished, picking up one of the crutches at his side and shaking it playfully at the little girl. They were sitting in the great library today. "Oh, but you aren't really glad at all for things you just say you are," pouted Pollyanna, her eyes on the dog, dozing before the fire. "You know you don't play the game right ever, Mr. Pendleton. You know you don't." The man's face grew suddenly very grave. "That's why I want you, little girl, to help me play it. Will you come?" Pollyanna turned in surprise. "Mr. Pendleton, you don't really mean that?" "But I do. I want you. Will you come?" Pollyanna looked distressed. "Why, Mr. Pendleton, I can't. You know I can't. Why, I'm Aunt Polly's." A quick something crossed the man's face that Pollyanna could not quite understand. His head came up almost fiercely. "You're no more hers than perhaps she would let you come to me," he finished more gently. "Would you come if she did?" Pollyanna frowned in deep thought. "But Aunt Polly has been so good to me," she began slowly, "and she took me when I didn't have anybody left but the Ladies' Aid, and—" Again this spasm of something crossed the man's face, but this time, when he spoke, his voice was low and very sad. "Pollyanna, long years ago I loved somebody very much. I hoped to bring her some day to this house. I pictured how happy we'd be together in our home all the long years to come." "Yes," pitied Pollyanna, her eyes shining with sympathy. "But, well, I didn't bring her here. Never mind why. I just didn't, that's all. And ever since then this great gray pile of stone has been a house, never a home. It takes a woman's hand and heart or a child's presence to make a home, Pollyanna, and I have not either. Now, will you come, my dear?" Pollyanna sprang to her feet. Her face was fairly illumined. "Mr. Pendleton, you mean that you wish you had had that woman's hand and heart all this time?" "Why, yes, Pollyanna." "Oh, I'm so glad. Then it's all right," sighed the little girl. "Now you can take us both, and everything will be lovely." "Take you both?" repeated the man dazedly. A faint doubt crossed Pollyanna's countenance. "Well, of course, Aunt Polly isn't won over yet, but I'm sure she will be if you tell it to her just as you did to me, and then we'd both come, of course." A look of actual terror leapt to the man's eyes. "Aunt Polly come here?" Pollyanna's eyes widened a little. "Would you rather go there?" she asked. "Of course, the house isn't quite so pretty, but it's nearer." "Pollyanna, what are you talking about?" asked the man very gently now. "Why, about Where we're going to live, of course," rejoined Pollyanna in obvious surprise. "I thought you meant here at first. You said it was here that you had wanted Aunt Polly's hand and heart all these years to make a home, and—" An inarticulate cry came from the man's throat. He raised his hand and began to speak, but the next moment he dropped his hand nervelessly at his side. "The doctor, sir," said the maiden in the doorway. Pollyanna rose at once. John Pendleton turned to her feverishly. "Pollyanna, for heaven's sake, say nothing of what I asked you yet," he begged in a low voice. Pollyanna dimpled in a sunny smile. "Of course not. Just as if I didn't know you'd rather tell her yourself," she called back merrily over her shoulder. John Pendleton fell limply back in his chair. "Why, what's up?" demanded the doctor. A minute later, his fingers on his patient's galloping pulse. A whimsical smile trembled on John Pendleton's lips. "Overdose of your tonic, I guess," he laughed, as he noted the doctor's eyes following Pollyanna's little figure down the driveway. Chapter 20. Which is more surprising? Sunday mornings Pollyanna usually attended church and Sunday school. Sunday afternoons she frequently went for a walk with Nancy. She had planned one for the day after her Saturday afternoon visit to Mr. John Pendleton, but on the way home from Sunday school Dr. Chilton overtook her in his gig and brought his horse to a stop. "Suppose you let me drive you home, Pollyanna," he suggested. "I want to speak to you a minute. I was just driving out to your place to tell you," he went on as Pollyanna settled herself at his side. "Mr. Pendleton sent a special request for you to go to see him this afternoon. Sure. He says it's very important." Pollyanna nodded happily. "Yes, it is, I know. I'll go." The doctor eyed her with some surprise. "I'm not sure I shall let you, after all," he declared, his eyes twinkling. "You seemed more upsetting than soothing yesterday, young lady." Pollyanna laughed. "Oh, it wasn't me, truly. Not really, you know. Not so much as it was Aunt Polly." The doctor turned with a quick start. "Your aunt?" he ejaculated. Pollyanna gave a happy little bounce in her seat. "Yes, and it's so exciting and lovely. Just like a story, you know. I'm going to tell you," she burst out with sudden decision. "He said not to mention it, but he wouldn't mind you knowing, of course. He meant not to mention it to her." "Her?" "Yes, Aunt Polly. And of course he would want to tell her himself instead of having me do it. They once were beaux." "Beaux?" asked the doctor. He said the word. The horse started violently, as if the hand that held the reins had given them a sharp jerk. "Yes," nodded Pollyanna happily. "That's the story part, you see. I didn't know it till Nancy told me. She said Aunt Polly had a beau years ago, and they quarreled. She didn't know who it was at first, but we've found out now. It's Mr. Pendleton, you know." The doctor relaxed suddenly. The hand holding the reins fell limply to his lap. "Oh, no, I didn't know," he said quietly. Pollyanna hurried on. "They were nearing the Harrington homestead." "Yes, and I'm so glad now. It's come out lovely. Mr. Pendleton asked me to come and live with him, but of course I wouldn't leave Aunt Polly like that, after she'd been so good to me. Then he told me all about the woman's hand and heart, and that he used to want, and I found out that he wanted it now, and I was so glad, for of course, if he wants to make up the quarrel, everything will be all right now, and Aunt Polly and I will both go to live there, or else he'll come to live with us. Of course, Aunt Polly doesn't know yet, and we haven't got everything settled, so I suppose that's why he wanted to see me this afternoon, sure." The doctor sat, suddenly erect. There was an odd smile on his lips. "Yes, I can well imagine that Mr. John Pendleton does want to see you, Pollyanna," he nodded, as he pulled his horse to a stop before the door. "There's Aunt Polly now in the window," cried Pollyanna then, a second later. "Why, no, she isn't. But I thought I saw her." "No, she isn't there now," said the doctor. His lips had suddenly lost their smile. Pollyanna found a very nervous John Pendleton waiting for her that afternoon. "Pollyanna," he began at once, "I've been trying all night to puzzle out what you meant by all that yesterday, about my wanting your Aunt Polly's hand and heart here all those years. What did you mean?" "Why, because you were Beau's, once, and I was so glad you still felt that way now." "Your Aunt Polly and I?" At the obvious surprise in the man's voice, Pollyanna opened wide her eyes. "Why, Mr. Pendleton," Nancy said, "you were." The man gave a short little laugh. "Indeed. Well, I'm afraid I shall have to say that Nancy didn't know." "Then you weren't Beau's?" Pollyanna's voice was tragic with dismay. "Never." "And it isn't all coming out like a book?" There was no answer. The man's eyes were moodily fixed out the window. "Oh, dear. And it was all going so splendidly," almost sobbed Pollyanna. "I'd have been so glad to come with Aunt Polly." "And you won't now?" The man asked the question without turning his head. "Of course not. I'm Aunt Polly's." The man turned now almost fiercely. "Before you were hers, Pollyanna, you were your mother's. And it was your mother's hand and heart that I wanted long years ago." "My mother's?" "Yes. I had not meant to tell you, but perhaps it's better after all that I do now." John Pendleton's face had grown very white. He was speaking with evident difficulty. Pollyanna, her eyes wide and frightened, her lips parted, was gazing at him fixedly. "I loved your mother, but she didn't love me, and after a time she went away with your father. I did not know until then how much I did care. The whole world suddenly seemed to turn back under my fingers. But never mind. For long years I have been a cross, crabby, unlovable, unloved old man, though I'm not nearly 60 yet, Pollyanna. Then one day, like one of the prisms that you love so well, little girl, you danced into my life, and flecked my dreary old world with dashes of purple and gold and scarlet of your own bright cheeriness. I found out after a time who you were, and I thought then I never wanted to see you again. I didn't want to be reminded of your mother. But you know how that came out. I just had to have you come, and now I want you always, Pollyanna. Won't you come now?" "But Mr. Pendleton, there's Aunt Polly." Pollyanna's eyes were blurred with tears. The man made an impatient gesture. "What about me? How do you suppose I'm going to be glad about anything without you? Why, Pollyanna, it's only since you came that I've been even half glad to live. But if I had you for my own little girl, I'd be glad for anything. And I'd try to make you glad, too. You shouldn't have a wish ungratified. All my money, to the last cent, should go to make you happy." Pollyanna looked shocked. "Why, Mr. Pendleton, as if I'd let you spend it on me, all that money you've saved for the heathen." A dull red came to the man's face. He started to speak, but Pollyanna was still talking. "Besides, anybody with such a lot of money as you have doesn't need me to make you glad about things. You're making other folks so glad, giving them things that you just can't help being glad yourself. Why, look at those prisms you gave Mrs. Snow and me, and the gold pieces you gave Nancy on her birthday, and—" Yes, never mind about all that," interrupted the man. His face was very, very red now, and no wonder. Perhaps it was not for giving things that John Pendleton had been best known in the past. "That's all nonsense. 'Twasn't much anyhow. But what there was because of you. You gave those things, not I." "Yes, you did," he repeated, in answer to the shocked denial in her face. And that only goes to prove all the more how I need you, little girl, he added, his voice softening into a tender pleading once more. If ever I'm to play the glad game, Pollyanna, you'll have to come and play it with me. The little girl's forehead puckered into a wistful frown. Aunt Polly had been so good to me, she began, but the man interrupted her sharply. The old irritability had come back to his face. Impatience, which would brook no opposition, had been a part of John Pendleton's nature too long to yield very easily now to restraint. Of course, she's been good to you, but she doesn't want you, I'll warrant, half so much as I do, he contested. Why, Mr. Pendleton, she's glad, I know, to have— Glad, interrupted the man, thoroughly losing his patience now. I'll wager Miss Polly doesn't know how to be glad for anything. Oh, she does her duty, I know. She's a very dutiful woman. I've had experience with her duty before. I'll acknowledge we haven't been the best of friends for the last 15 or 20 years, but I know her. Every one knows her, and she isn't the glad kind, Pollyanna. She doesn't know how to be. As for your coming to me, you just ask her and see if she won't let you come. And oh, little girl, I want you so, he finished brokenly. Pollyanna rose to her feet with a long sigh. All right, I'll ask her, she said wistfully. Of course, I don't mean that I wouldn't like to live here with you, Mr. Pendleton, but— She did not complete her sentence. There was a moment's silence, then she added, Well, anyhow, I'm glad I didn't tell her yesterday, 'cause then I suppose she was wanted too. John Pendleton smiled grimly. Well, yes, Pollyanna, I guess it is just as well you didn't mention it yesterday. I didn't, only the doctor, and of course he doesn't count. The doctor? Cried John Pendleton, turning quickly. Not Dr. Chilton. Yes, when he came to tell me you wanted to see me today, you know. Well, of all the— muttered the man, falling back in his chair. Then he sat up with a sudden interest. And what did Dr. Chilton say? He asked. Pollyanna frowned thoughtfully. Why, I don't remember. Not much, I reckon. Oh, he did say he could well imagine you did want to see me. Oh, did he indeed? Answered John Pendleton, and Pollyanna wondered why he gave that sudden, odd little laugh. Chapter 21. A Question Answered. The sky was darkening fast when what appeared to be an approaching thunder shower, when Pollyanna hurried down the hill from John Pendleton's house. Halfway home she met Nancy with an umbrella. By that time, however, the clouds had shifted their positions, and the shower was not so imminent. Guess it's going around ter the north, announced Nancy, eyeing the sky critically. I thought 'twas all the time, but Miss Polly wanted ter come with this. She was worried about you. Was she? Murmured Pollyanna abstractedly, eyeing the clouds in her turn. Nancy sniffed a little. You don't seem to notice what I said, she observed aggravatedly. I said your aunt was worried about you. Oh, sighed Pollyanna, remembering suddenly the question she was so soon to ask her aunt. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare her. Well, I'm glad, retorted Nancy unexpectedly. I am. Pollyanna stared. Glad that Aunt Polly was scared about me? Why, Nancy, that isn't the way to play the game. To be glad for things like that, she objected. There wasn't no game in it, retorted Nancy. Never thought of it. You don't seem to sense what it means to have Aunt Polly worried about you, child. Why, it means worried, and worried is horrid to feel, maintained Pollyanna. What else can it mean? Nancy tossed her head. Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means she's at last getting down somewhere near human, like folks, and that she ain't just doing her duty by you all the time. Why, Nancy, demurred the scandalized Pollyanna. Aunt Polly always does her duty. She's a very dutiful woman. Unconsciously, Pollyanna repeated John Pendleton's words of half an hour before. Nancy chuckled. "You're right, she is. And she always was, I guess. But she's something more now since you come." Pollyanna's face changed. Her brows drew into a troubled frown. "There, that's what I was going to ask you, Nancy," she sighed. "Do you think Aunt Polly likes to have me here? Would she mind if I wasn't here any more?" Nancy threw a quick look into the little girl's absorbed face. She had expected to be asked this question long before, and she had dreaded it. She had wondered how she should answer it, how she could answer it honestly without cruelly hurting the questioner. But now, in the face of the new suspicions that had become convictions by the afternoon's umbrella sending, Nancy now welcomed the question with open arms. She was sure that with a clean conscience today, she could set the love-hungry little girl's heart at rest. "Likes to have you here. Would she miss you if you wasn't here?" cried Nancy indignantly. "As if that wasn't just what I was telling you of. Didn't she send me post-haste with an umbrella 'cause she sees a little cloud in the sky? Didn't she made me tote your things all downstairs so you could have that pretty room you wanted? Why, Miss Pollyanna, when you remember how at first she hated to have—" With a choking cough, Nancy pulled herself up just in time. "And it ain't just things I can put my fingers on neither," rushed on Nancy's breathlessly. It's ways she has, that shows how you've been softening her up and mulling her down. The cat and the dog, and why, she speaks to me, and lots of things. Why, Miss Pollyanna, there ain't no tellin' how she'd miss you if you wasn't here," finished Nancy, speaking with an enthusiastic certainty that was meant to hide the perilous admission she had almost made before. Even then, she was not quite prepared for the sudden joy that illumined Pollyanna's face. "Oh, Nancy, I'm so glad, glad. You don't know how glad I am that Aunt Polly wants me." "As if I'd leave her now," thought Pollyanna, as she climbed the stairs to her room a little later. "I always knew I wanted to live with Aunt Polly, but I reckon maybe I didn't know quite how much I wanted Aunt Polly to want to live with me." The task of telling John Pendleton of her decision would not be an easy one, Pollyanna knew, and she dreaded it. She was very fond of John Pendleton. She was very sorry for him because he seemed to be so sorry for himself. She was sorry, too, for the long, lonely life that had made him so unhappy, and she was grieved that it had been because of her mother that he had spent those dreary years. She pictured the great gray house as it would be after its master was well again, with its silent rooms, its littered floors, its disordered desk, and her heart ached for his loneliness. She wished that everywhere someone might be found and it was at this point that she sprang to her feet with a little cry of joy at the thought that had come to her. As soon as she could after that, she hurried up the hill to John Pendleton's house, and in due time she found herself in the great dim library, with John Pendleton himself sitting near her, his long thin hands laying idly on the arms of his chair, and his faithful little dog at his feet. "Well, Pollyanna, is it to be the glad game with me all the rest of my life?" asked the man gently. "Oh, yes," cried Pollyanna. "I've thought of the very gladdest kind of thing for you to do." "And with you?" asked John Pendleton, his mouth growing a little stym at the corners. "No, but—" "Pollyanna, you aren't going to say no," interrupted a voice deep with emotion. I've got to, Mr. Pendleton. Truly I have. Aunt Polly. Did she refuse to let you come?" I didn't ask her," stammered the little girl miserably. "Pollyanna." Pollyanna turned away her eyes. She could not meet the hurt, grieved gaze of her friend. So you didn't even ask her? I couldn't, sir, truly, faltered Pollyanna. You see, I found out without asking. Aunt Polly wants me with her, and I want to stay, too, she confessed bravely. You don't know how good she's been to me. And I think really, sometimes she's beginning to be glad about things, lots of things, and you know she never used to be. You said it yourself. Oh, Mr. Pendleton, I couldn't leave Aunt Polly now. There was a long pause. Only the snapping of the wood fire in the grate broke the silence. At last, however, the man spoke. No, Pollyanna, I see. You couldn't leave her now, he said. I won't ask you again. The last word was so low it was almost inaudible, but Pollyanna heard. Oh, but you don't know about the rest of it, she reminded him eagerly. There's the very gladdest thing you can do, truly there is. Not for me, Pollyanna. Yes, sir, for you. You said it. You said only a woman's hand and a heart or a child's presence could make a home, and I can get it for you, a child's presence, not me, you know, but another one. As if I would have any but you, resented an indignant voice. But you will, when you know you're so kind and good. Why, think of the prisms and the gold pieces and all that money you save for the heathens and— Pollyanna, interrupted the man savagely, once and for all, let us end this nonsense. I've tried to tell you half a dozen times before. There is no money for the heathen. I never sent a penny to them in my life. There. He lifted his chin and braced himself to meet what he expected, the grieved disappointment of Pollyanna's eyes. To his amazement, however, there was neither grief nor disappointment in Pollyanna's eyes. There was only surprised joy. Oh, oh, she cried, clapping her hands. I'm so glad. That is, she corrected, coloring distressfully. I don't mean that I'm not sorry for the heathen, only just now I can't help being glad that you don't want to, the little Indian boys, because all the rest have wanted them, and so I'm glad you'd rather have Jimmy Bean. Now I know you'll take him. Take who? Jimmy Bean. He's the child's presence. You know, he'll be so glad to be it. And I had to tell him last week that even my ladies' aids out west wouldn't take him, and he was so disappointed. But now, when he hears of this, he'll be so glad. Will he? Well, I won't, ejaculated the man decisively. Pollyanna, this is sheer nonsense. You don't mean you won't take him? I certainly do mean just that. But he'd be a lovely child's presence, faltered Pollyanna. She was almost crying now. And you couldn't be lonesome with Jemmy around. I don't doubt it, rejoined the man, but I think I prefer the loneliness. It was then that Pollyanna, for the first time in weeks, suddenly remembered something Nancy had once told her. She raised her chin aggrievedly. Maybe you think a nice little boy wouldn't be better than the old dead skeleton you keep somewhere, like I think it would. Skeleton? Yes, Nancy said you had one in your closet somewhere. Why, what? Suddenly the man threw back his head and laughed. He laughed very heartily indeed, so heartily that Pollyanna began to cry from pure nervousness. When he saw that, John Pendleton sat erect very promptly. His face grew grave at once. Pollyanna, I suspect you are right. More right than you know, he said gently. In fact, I know that a nice, live little boy would be far better than my skeleton in the closet. Only, we ain't always willing to make the change. We are apt to still cling to our skeletons. However, suppose you tell me a little more about this nice little boy, and Pollyanna told him. Perhaps the laugh cleared the air, or perhaps the pathos of Jimmy Bean's story, as told by Pollyanna's eager little lips, touched a heart already strangely softened. At all events, when Pollyanna went home that night, she carried with her an invitation for Jimmy Bean himself to call at the great house with Pollyanna the next Saturday afternoon. And I'm so glad. I'm sure you'll like him, sighed Pollyanna as she said goodbye. "I do so want Jimmy Bean to have a home and folks that care, you know." And we will continue Pollyanna next Wednesday. And thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.